they're taking it very seriously, and they are working with, you know, all kinds of cyber experts and everything to make sure that there are precautions and that we have firewalls.
So it's more than just the ballots involved. It's also the
right.
list, right?
Yes.
The election judges.
Oh yeah. No, they're very aware of the potential, you know, interference and taking whatever steps they can to make sure that we're safe.
Thank you.
Willow?
Yeah, I'm Willow Walkie. Thank you both for all of your work on LGBTQ rights. It was wonderful to see that. I also wanted to state, so everybody knows, there were no bills opposing LGBTQ rights.
It's true. Yeah.
That's one of the victories, yeah.
It's a huge step. One of the consequences of the committee hearings being broadcast is I got to watch them. And it was very frustrating having several delegates say they didn't understand gender identity and gender identity issues and how that can be changed. How do we educate these gentlemen on things that lots of people seem to understand, but they can't seem to wrap their heads around?
I mean, I think continuing the conversation, just kind of in the same vein that we've been discussing, is setting up time to go talk to them. A lot of this is that it's unknown for them, right? They haven't had, one of the reasons that they're afraid of LGBTQ people is because they don't have any friends who, or they might not have a family member. A lot of us do, and so we're completely understanding that we all matter. But the more we can have conversations where we're face to face, having a civil discussion with one another to say, hey, guess what? Having Danica Rome in the body now, that's going to make a difference. People are talking to her every day and realizing she is a smart, accomplished woman who happens to be transgender, that's not who she is, and it doesn't make her any different than any of the rest of us. But having access to one another, to sharing information, to understanding that we're all just people, and this is not only dealing with LGBTQ rights, but immigration issues, people with diverse backgrounds, disability, elderly, children, women. I mean, as we become a more diverse body, we are going to evolve, and people are going to have to change. And I carried a bill that would have helped people, transgender people, get birth certificates changed. And in that conversation, there was a gentleman who was a good bit my senior, and I said, you know, we're not in the 1950s anymore. And he acknowledged, well, I'm a child of the 1950s, and this is hard for me. Oh. Having that conversation, making us have that conversation, I think is the first step to changing it.
I just want to say that bill would have helped the young trans man in your district,
yeah,
who wants to get a job this summer,
yeah,
but his birth certificate says female, his state ID says male. He doesn't feel comfortable handing those to a future employer and saying, hey, this is me.
I understand that.
And I would just add that it really is an evolution, you know. I mean, and the more folks, the more awareness that there is, the better things are gonna go. I mean, you know, it was only just barely 10 years ago that Virginia had the marriages between one natural-born man and one natural-born woman amendment to the Constitution passed. I mean, so things have swung in the other direction. You know, at really a very impressive pace. And I thank the equality community for sticking together, because the gay and lesbian community said, no, we're taking our trans brothers and sisters with us, and you know, we're definitely, you know, one group. And so that has really, I think, helped. And I think with more awareness, you know, it will definitely help with this as we move forward. So, you know, one of the things because I've carried the fair housing bill for so many years, every year I go and I look at my statistics for Fortune 500 companies and how many of them, you know, what percentage of them extend their benefits and non-discrimination policies to same-sex couples and to their transgender employees. And, you know, it has always been in the really, like, from the low 80s down up into the mid 90s now for same-sex partners. But it had started at maybe 60, you know, 65% about for transgender folks, and now it's up in the high 80s. So, you know, I mean, that's something that even the Fortune 500, which is the old guard, you know, that you look at, who are protecting their employees from with non-discrimination policies. So I think, you know, it's an evolution, but it's moving in the right direction,
Yes,
for sure.
I think so.
We go back to the pipelines. I've got a question and observation. I'm under the impression that, say, other pipelines that go through multiple states, each state has to decide whether they want that pipeline to go through, and I assume they tax. Do we tax these people that are bringing these pipelines through our state? That's my first question.
Good question. I
And-
don't know the answer to that.
Well, and I'm relating it to, you know, we had the meals tax question, and we threw it upon the restaurants. We have the metro, and we're throwing it upon sellers of homes. We're taking little sections and putting the whole burden on a little piece of Virginia. So my question is, you mentioned two things. If they bring, they're doing a pipeline for local, I assume, to supply Virginians with what's coming through the pipeline. It needs to be made, enlarge it, and take it to international. I need to understand this. Putting a
The
bigger
pipeline's going down to Hampton Roads, and I anticipate that's, and out, and
It's not benefiting us.
to export, you know.
Well, so that's kind of my question. But if we did, can we tax them? If we can, that would certainly pay for our metro, and it would pay for our education. What the meals tax was supposed to do, it would take it for 30 years. We would have enough education money for 30 years with that kind of money, taxing those kinds of people. This is this is big money. And they could fund, and why don't we say Rolls Royce is right there in the town center? Why don't we ask them to proffer or put some money into our schools? Microsoft's there, Oracle's there. Anyway, just got kicked.
Yeah, so there's, so you're concerned about the funding stream that could come perhaps from big money to pay for the things that we need.
People's working in restaurants.
Right. So one good thing, I'm now on the education committee, and we are looking at proposals of getting the businesses to work with the schools around the state to help bring more funds in to support at least education initiatives. I'm not aware on the pipeline issue, and I don't misstate anything because I don't know the details.
That's a thought.
But it's a thought. But I appreciate that you're trying to think of things that would take the burden off of the small folks and bring it so that it's a fair situation for
They're
everybody.
acting abusers.
Yeah. Any?
Sexual harassment.
Okay, I would love to talk about sexual harassment. Did y'all had a conversation too, I'm sure, in the Senate. But
You did not have
Oh, you did not?
as much of a conversation
Okay.
as you guys did, so I think
Please-
that you can take this from.
please let me share this with you. So, Delegate Vivian Watts is the longest serving delegate in the history of the House of Delegates. And she was just on NPR yesterday on Kojo Namdi with Kathy Tran, and I unfortunately didn't get to hear that. But Vivian expressed concern to our incoming speaker, Kirk Cox, and to the leadership early on to say that she had ideas about what we needed to do to make sure that we were addressing the concerns of the women dealing with sexual harassment. And it would not only deal with members of the House of Delegates, but also lobbyists, staff, and everybody would be protected under her concept. She took it to the speaker, who dismissed her. She took it to the Rules Committee, and they said, no, we're not going with your plan. We know best. We're going to have the clerk develop a module for the members that it would just, you know, take care of our folks, and that's all we need to do. So on the floor, Vivian decided to stand up. She felt bolstered because we have a bunch of new women, and we were all standing behind her, and she felt in the you know, Me Too movement that she should be compelled to say something. So she brought some amendments to the Republican proposal that came down to ask for some changes. Each one was summarily dismissed and lost on a party line vote. She then explained this was not her trying to get anybody, because they tried to turn it into a political gotcha moment. They're like, you're not going to get us, you know, we've already got our plan and it's good enough. And she's like, I'm not trying to get you. I went to the speaker, I went to the rules committee, I've written this, I've provided you all copies of everything that I've tried to present, and you have rejected it. Now let me tell you, I think our clerk is wonderful, but he nor any of the men who sit on the rules committee have probably ever either been sexually harassed or have been part of sexually harassing another person. They don't understand the problem. And for them to say, shut up and listen to us, we know what's right for you, is exactly the issue that we've all been fighting to try to have resolved. I don't know anybody who can say that they, you know, any adult woman, even the college women that I know who have never had something happen to them where they felt victimized. And I actually went to the majority leader, who is a gentleman named Todd Gilbert. Todd Gilbert is about Glenn's size. Glenn is 6'5", my husband, and a good bit bigger, and he's an imposing figure. He was the person who spoke to Vivian, the little, you know, 70-year-old woman who was saying, we need to have a voice in this, and he's the one standing over her saying, no, we don't. You be quiet and sit back down. We've got this covered. You don't need to worry about it. So I went to him quietly and said, you know, the optics weren't real good, and you might want to make sure that she's part of this process. And he was like, oh, maybe we can do something, you know. So at least they had another conversation. But again, the role of getting our policy in the House of Delegates is up to the clerk to do an online training. You know,
Yeah, right.
that's not what we need. And it doesn't protect. I talked to a young woman in the administration who said, you've never been in an elevator with a lobbyist by yourself. Guys, I have, and I'm not going to be protected by that, she said. There are problems with it. Again, we don't need daddies protecting us. We need to be at the table making those decisions and setting the policy, and that's all that she was asking. I'm very hot under the collar about that because, you know, I've lived through things myself, and Vivian definitely has in her long tenure in the House of Delegates. So, oh yeah, we have 21 minutes. So yeah, so.
I'd like to suggest you all get a biology course going down there. It seems to me like a lot of these issues, particularly you don't bring up abortion or women's choice or any of these kinds of things.
You need it in Congress. Yeah, well,
Sometimes science is not a big on.
Oh, is that a dangerous subject, is it?
Psychology.
So I apologize, I came in a few minutes late, so maybe you already had a full discussion of, to me, the biggest issue that I can foresee some progress in this session is Medicaid expansion, and I'd like to know more about I think probably everyone in this room supports Medicaid expansion, and what can we do as advocates to move the legislature in the right way here?
So tomorrow we're going to see the budget in the House and the Senate. We did have a conversation about this, Lori.
Okay.
I'm hopeful. I've gotten indications from the speaker that that's in play. I'm crossing my fingers and sitting quietly to hope that they will be willing to play on that. It's certainly the governor's #1 priority. It's our Democratic caucus's #1 priority. Part of the reason that we've tried to be so accommodating in a lot of the legislation that we have been willing to work on is in good faith that this is actually coming forward. So, but we don't have any assurances until, we see what's going to happen in the budget. Terry Kilgore, who is Southwest Virginia delegate from, he's the chair of the Commerce Committee, wrote an op-ed saying that he believes that, Kentucky's done the right thing to expand Medicaid, and he's finally speaking out. On the floor on Friday, Ben Klein, Republican from Rockingham County, got up and said, nobody needs to be looking at Kentucky for anything for leadership, and I don't agree. So I don't believe the Republican caucus is sure of how they feel about this. I think there's a lot of dissent in their ranks. We need to get it to the floor, and we need to make sure that people vote their consciences. So as much as you can encourage people to do that. My aide Karen and I drove down to the Wise County Clinic last year, to the Ram Clinic to volunteer, where we saw, the 1,000 people there for getting their one health care a day in the whole year. It's a real need, and we could be helping 400,000 people. It's just common sense. So
the legislators who need to be moved are primarily the Republican legislators, so we're not their constituents.
You've got us.
But is there anything we can do to try to move those Republicans whose votes are the ones that are in flux that could make the difference here? We know we've got you.
Right. So do you have friends and allies and
across the state,
contacts in other parts of the state? There are different groups that have emerged over the past couple of years, grassroots organizations where people do live in those districts. If you have any connections with any of them, I would be talking to them and getting them to talk to their legislators. And then just the groundswell of reminding folks about the rural hospitals that are at risk, and the actual consequences of everyday people.
And what citizen groups have you seen that are most effective on this issue that we should be learning from and supporting?
Sure. Well, there's a number of faith-based groups which I think typically are well received. There are Indivisibles and
there's Virginia organized.
Thank you, Jennifer, and I can, I guess, give some, and I echo everything you just said, and I can give a kind of the Senate perspective on that. And before I do, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Wexton. I represent the 33rd District, which goes from the town of Leesburg to the town of Herndon. So I have the two best towns in the entire Commonwealth of Virginia in my district. So as Jennifer pointed out, this year everything is different, but everything is the same. Because the House of Delegates is 51 Republicans, 49 Democrats. The Senate, we didn't have elections, so things didn't change for us. It's 21 Republicans and 19 Democrats. In terms of everything changing, so many new, young, diverse delegates coming and joining us is great, and a lot of new energy. We also moved into a new building. So they're tearing down the old General Assembly building, which was long overdue. It was a very sick building with all kinds of issues. But we're in temporary quarters, which is smaller and taking some getting used to. And so, that's been interesting. And then the week after we got there, a flu bug swept through the General Assembly, and many of our colleagues and staff and everybody got the flu. So it was a very interesting first couple weeks. But everything seems to have calmed down. We've reached crossover, which is the halfway point. That was on Tuesday. We had to finish. That's the day by which, for the first half of the session, the Senate only works on Senate bills, so bills that have been introduced by other senators, and the House only works on House bills, bills that have been introduced by other delegates. We have to finish our work on those at the halfway point, and now we're going through the House bills, and our Senate bills are going over to the House. Because obviously every bill has to pass both houses of the General Assembly and be signed by the President on law. So as Jennifer pointed out, some of the big issues that we're looking at, this is a budget year, it's an even numbered year. So we're dealing with the biennial budget. We don't, the budget bills are gonna be introduced, or at least synopses of the budget bills. We won't have the actual bill probably till Tuesday night, Wednesday. But the finance and appropriations committees will be introducing them tomorrow. So with the House doing their introductions at 1 and the Senate at 5. The Governor McAuliffe's introduced budget, because the governor introduces budget before he goes out the door. His introduced budget included money and funding for Medicaid expansion. And that results, expanding Medicaid, that doesn't only result in many more Virginians having access to affordable quality health care, it also results in a lot of budget savings for the Commonwealth. Because we're going to be able to leverage federal dollars and not have to pay out for inefficient health care. So the introduced budget contained about $275 million, I think, in savings due to Medicaid expansion. I believe that there has been movement in the House in prior years. There has been a lot of resistance. Speaker Howell was absolutely dead set against any sort of Medicaid expansion, any sort of expansion under that federal regime. I know that he and our former governor were often butting heads on this. Well, now we have a new governor who just happens to be a physician. We have a new speaker who has a very different House of Delegates over which he is presiding. And I think that the people spoke very strongly in 2017 that healthcare was one of the top reasons that they were coming to the polls and voting the way they did. So we will see. Not much has changed in the Senate. As I said, we didn't have an election, so everything's the same. And one thing that's different between the Senate and the House is that our rules do not call for proportional representation on committees. So in the House, if you have a 22-person or 23-person committee, you'll have roughly half and half Republicans and Democrats. With a little bit of tweaking, yeah. But we don't have that. So on committees like Commerce and Labor, you can have 11 Republicans and 4 Democrats. On Courts of Justice, you'll have 10 Republicans and 5 Democrats. And we also have a proxy system. So members can come and leave their proxy with other members to vote them for them. And so we have people who are double scheduled, but they still get all the votes because they leave their proxies with another member. So every bill that does come out of the Senate has to have pretty strong bipartisan support in order to get through. Some of the bills that I've had this year are some of the things that have actually made it through the Senate. Things like fingerprint background checks to make daycare safer. I have in the last year, I guess, Virginia has always, or for many, many years, recognized and given state funding to nonprofits who manage and take care of Confederate graves, Revolutionary War graves, and most recently, one of our colleagues in the House of Delegates got recognition for traditional African American burial grounds, because they had never been included in the definition. Well, in Loudoun County, we have the cemetery for the enslaved, the burial ground for the enslaved at Belmont Plantation, which just got recognized. And I carried the bill to get them into the code and make it possible for them to seek state funding to maintain those graves as well. I've had a couple pieces of legislation for I had one for domestic violence resources, which I think has very little fiscal impact, and I'm hoping we'll make it through the House of Delegates. It went through the Senate without a lot of objection. Some of the other things we've been working on are trying to get student loans under control, student loan debt under control. This is something that's very challenging for a lot of our constituents. I know that when I knock on doors, that's one of the things that people talk about a lot. And although, to really take the big steps, like creating a student loan refinancing authority, which is something I'd like to do, is a pretty heavy lift. One thing that we think is going to be successful this year is an Office of the Student Loan Ombudsman. So at least there will be a state representative who can help negotiate and help residents, help Virginia citizens navigate through student loan problems that they're having. So that's kind of where we are right now, I guess. The big issues, as Jennifer said, are really one of the big issues that we're facing locally is WMATA, is Metro, and meeting the capital needs that we have for Metro. We need to come up with basically $150 million each year for the next 10 years in order to help WMATA meet its capital needs. And that's a big lift, and it's Virginia, Maryland, DC, and the federal government who are all going to have to be in this together. So that's something that, you know, we have different bills on those that are coming through down the pike, and we'll see what ultimately comes out from that. But that's about where we are. I will say that, you know, one thing that was very disappointing to me is for yet another year, you know, we did not manage to make any gains on gun safety legislation. This most recent school shooting was, I mean, it's certainly affected me very deeply, and I know it probably has many of you, and I've heard from so many constituents and so many people who are just tired of children being slaughtered just because they went to school that day. So, you know, that's been a source of disappointment for me. I guess on the bright side, we didn't have a lot of really bad gun legislation coming through. There was a bill that made it through the Senate that would allow everybody to bring guns into churches, which I had many faith leaders from different faiths come to my office and say, please don't don't vote for this thing. I don't want guns in my church. And that, I think, is not going to make it through the House of Delegates.
Actually, they pulled it, so it was ready to be voted on. It was ready to be voted on the floor, and the patron pulled it at the last minute and said, I'm withdrawing the bill or sending it back. So they recognized, I think, because folks like you all reached out to everybody around the state and used your voices, they heard us. And so that's one of the big victories that I think we have. And it's just a reminder that you all really matter, that you all reaching out to us, coming and talking to us, having the Moms Demand Action, showing up on, you know, en masse to say enough is enough is the way we are going to eventually catch this problem. I would just like to add, I had a bill that would have, if you would have had a civil liability component. If you sell a gun to someone else without getting a background check, you could have been held liable. And I sat through 2 hours of testimony that day where there was, you know, background check, just a background check bill, removing the opportunity to sell bump stocks, which is the way that awful murder happened in Las Vegas. In fact, they had a woman who was at that concert. She went into detail about the horror that she experienced, how her aunt had been shot. She and her aunt hid in a bathroom for 5 hours, not knowing if they were going to make it out alive. She was crying. Most of the audience was crying. And at the end of her testimony, where she was begging them to say, stop allowing bump stocks in Virginia, someone from the Virginia Civil Defense League got up and said, let's don't get too emotional about this, folks. You know, just calm down. You can rig up a gun so that you can get, you know, high capacity rounds out without the bump stock, so it doesn't really make a difference. And then the subcommittee with 3 Republicans killed the bill. So by the time it was my turn, after hearing about 5 or 6 harrowing stories on common sense, basic, no-nonsense stuff that even my strong Republican conservative stepfather would support, I told them that I was really ashamed. I was ashamed that this is the Virginia that we live in. I was ashamed that they weren't willing to listen to the pain that this has caused, but get out of their box. And my colleague looked at me and he's like, you just can't take this stuff personally. No, this isn't personal against you. And to which I am like, I don't know what to do with you all anymore. So you all keep doing what you're doing, keep putting the pressure on, keep saying that enough is enough. It's the only way we're gonna change things, because until the makeup of the General Assembly changes, we're gonna have business as usual. And so we're all very passionate about that, especially with what happened last week. And
So sometimes your victory is getting good stuff done, sometimes the victory is making sure bad things aren't done.
Right.
So we'll take what we can get, but until there are different people in the General Assembly, things are unlikely to change dramatically either way.
yeah. Would you all like to ask some questions of us or give us some comments?
My name is Jack Shirley.
Oh, okay, go ahead, speak loudly.
My name is Jack Shirley. I'm a resident at Herndon Harbor House. Therefore, senior legislation is important. And as I remember it, yesterday, or 2 days ago, Trump passed a bill defunding money appropriated for incapacitated people. So therefore, all these little things, like private parking for all these people, et cetera, is no longer taken out of the particular place. Have you all heard anything about that, and how does that affect us here? That's one thing. Have you heard that?
So the question was, and the comment was that the current president has defunded a bunch of programs for incapacitated adults.
Correct.
And how is that going to affect us in Virginia? You know, the current president is defunding a lot of things that are crucial to all of us. And yes, it's going to affect us. I am not aware of a legislative fix that we've made at the state level, and perhaps Senator Wexton knows something that I am not aware of, but
I'm not aware of any legislative fixes that have gone in. It's kind of hard to keep up with the current administration and everything that they're cutting and talking about cutting and changes that they're talking about making. But the fact is that about 70%, at least 70% of our seniors in nursing homes in Virginia are on Medicaid. And so they are subject, they are covered, in addition to their own assets that go into it, they're covered by state Medicaid match and federal. So if there's going to be any sort of cutting of those funds, that's going to really impact us at the state level adversely. So I hope that that is not the case. That is something that would be a real problem. If they're going to make a bunch of federal cuts and push them off on the states in that way, and on our seniors.
Vicki?
So, to fund Metro, one of the options is to raise the congestion relief tax. And I don't know if anybody even knows what the congestion relief tax is. I'm a realtor. The only people that are affected by the congestion relief tax are sellers of houses. At this moment, they're paying 1.5% per thousand to fund this, and it's just for Northern Virginia and I believe Hampton Roads area and everything. So they want to go up. I believe I was at a legislative, went with the NVAR to lobby against it. Not that I agree that that is an issue, because I don't think anybody even realizes, most sellers, and Jennifer, you would know that from the title company, most sellers realize that they're even paying this tax or that it comes back to Northern Virginia. I've had several discussions with people about this who were complaining about money not coming back to Northern Virginia, and I said, well, we have this tax. So is that going to be something that will happen? Will that tax be raised, or has there enough lobbyists killed it, or where are you going with that?
So I will do my best to repeat the question or the comment and talk about that. As part of this funding package for Metro, one of the proposals calls for certain taxes that are already imposed to have an increase, or to redirect some of the revenues from some portion of those revenues. So back in 2013, The General Assembly passed the very big, huge bipartisan transportation bill, HB 2313, which has put, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars into the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority for local and regional road building projects. Very much needed in Northern Virginia for primarily for pavement, but transit projects were eligible to submit proposals and requests for funding. The source of those, that was a revenue system, a taxing system, where unlike most of the taxes that we pay in Northern Virginia, you know, most of our, like our state income tax and other things like that, where we send our dollars down to Richmond to be redistributed out to the rest of the Commonwealth, and you know, we only get cents back on the dollar. These were taxes that were collected in Northern Virginia and remained in Northern Virginia in the NVTA jurisdiction. So that's Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William, Alexandria, Arlington, Falls Church, and the towns within them. Where that money came from, though, was kind of a patchwork of different taxes, including things like, and you know, when legislators have to impose taxes, which none of us likes doing, there is a tendency to want to impose those taxes on people who are not our constituents, right? So, so one of the things, you know, that one of the sources was, you know, the transient occupancy tax. So that's what people pay when they stay in a hotel and they come and visit in Virginia. Another, in this instance, is the grantor tax. So when somebody sells a house or a piece of real property, there are there's a tax associated with that. In this case, the congestion relief fee, which, you know, I guess that there's some thinking that, well, if they're selling their house, they're moving out of the area, right? So they could be moving out of state or whatever. And that has been a source of this. So I think what the proposal does call for that to be kind of redirected or increased. I don't know what ultimately is going to be what comes out of it. Right now there's a bill coming out of the House of Delegates, which is patroned by Delegate Hugo, and his only generates $105 million. The one from the Senate is patroned by Senator Saslaw and Senator Barker, and it generates $154 million. So and that's from a variety of different mechanisms, the grantor tax being one, the gas tax floor, and proposing a floor on that gas tax as well, the regional share of the gas tax, because when the, just interestingly, when the 2313 went through, there was a gas tax imposed and they set a floor for a portion of that. In other words, what the gas price was on whatever date that was in the wholesale, yeah, in 2013, which is when gas prices were quite a bit higher than they are right now. So anticipated revenues went way down because the regional transit portion of that didn't have a floor on it because it just was, you know, inadvertently left off. So reimposing that floor would be another part of it. So we'll see what happens with it. I mean, you cannot generate $100 million to $150 million of revenue without causing some pain, without making some people unhappy. And that's, you know, those are the kind of tough choices that we have to make as legislators about what we can do. So we'll see what happens.
I think it's imperative that we find a solution for that, and, you know, in conference we will work these details out between the two bodies. I supported the Hugo bill because you know, our economy right now is based on the metro being efficient and functional, and so I feel like it's something that we absolutely have to get behind, and I will encourage us to continue working on that issue. So.
And one thing that's worth noting is whatever we do here at the state level is going to be contingent on our partner jurisdictions doing what they need to do. So Maryland doing this, and the Maryland, DC, and the federal government, because they had, you know, we had these PREA grants over the last 10 years, and it was $150 million a year, and now they're trying to renege on those and decrease, you know, what what they've already promised. So, you know, they've got skin in the game too, because we moved the federal workforce on WMATA. So, you know, so it's everybody has to work together to make this work. That's one of the things, frankly, that makes our metro system so challenging, because we're the only major rail system, commuter rail system in the country that has to have 3 so very different jurisdictions for, I mean, if you count the federal government too, having to work together. And then also with all of the localities within those jurisdictions, so Fairfax, Arlington, you know, Alexandria, all the localities that have stations in their jurisdictions, because they have to kick in for an operating subsidy as well. So it's a very interesting system. It's challenging, and you know, the way that we fund it in Virginia is unique. It's different. It's very, I mean, Maryland, the state just strokes a check. In Virginia, you know, we have the state pays a share, and each locality pays a share based on how many miles of track and what the usage of how many stations they have and all that sort of thing. And it makes it, you know, it makes everybody have to work together a lot in a very challenging way.
My name is Elizabeth Coppage, and I am a member of the Loudoun County Moms Demand Action Organization. And the first thing I want to say is thank you for all that you've been doing to help end this epidemic of gun violence. Since Wednesday, we've had a lot of interest in our organization, and a lot of moms and just concerned citizens have come to us and said, what can we do? And we're meeting tomorrow with some of these new members, and in your opinion, you said, you know, make our voices heard. What's the best way we can make our voices heard in a constructive manner?
Sure. So Moms Demand Action has a lot of new members, people who are eager to get involved, and the question was, what's the best way to show your voice? Coming to Richmond while we're in session to speak to the legislators, not only to your own legislator, but to the other ones, a show of force that you care, writing, social media, making sure that you are being visible and constructive. Talking about ways to solve the problem instead of just telling people that they're wrong always is a good, you know, thing to do. And then continuing to organize throughout the year. So don't just go away once the session is over. You know, continue to have meetings, continue to have days of action where you're doing something. Every month on the 13th at 10 a.m. there is a vigil at the NRA headquarters. And
it's the
14th, excuse me, thanks Lori. And I've been there a number of times, Jennifer, I bet you've been there a number of times, just showing people, writing letters to the editor, you know, op-eds in the paper, other ways of getting your voice out. This is something that is not going to go away, and we know that the majority of people believe in common sense, gun violence prevention. In fact, I will say it again, my stepfather gave my mom a gun for Christmas the first year they were married. He was so excited to have her join him in his love of guns. He now is horrified and sickened and fed up with what's going on around our country. And he is a conservative Republican. This shouldn't be a Democrat versus Republican issue. It shouldn't be a rural versus urban. It should be a human issue where we are caring about our children and our parishioners at our churches. We should be able to go to a concert without being worried that we're going to be murdered, or a movie theater, or school, or church, or to our offices. I'm sure you're aware that you know, we have a very high-profile victim of gun violence in the House of Delegates now. Chris Hurst's fiance was murdered on camera while they were doing the news. But he's not alone. Kathleen Murphy's brother was murdered by gun violence. Mark Levine's sister was murdered by her domestic partner, and Hala Ayala's father was murdered with a gun. That is 4% of the House of Delegates who have lost loved ones to gun violence. And Kathleen Murphy tried to ask for a rule on the House floor this year, saying that members could, we would be protected because they would ban guns in the gallery while we're meeting. So we sit down on the floor, right? And then above us, the public can come in. They can bring guns with them if they want to. We couldn't get that rule passed so that we could be protected. We are like sitting ducks down there. On Martin Luther King Day every year, the day that we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, a man who was a civil rights hero and who was murdered by gunshot. Every year on Martin Luther King Day, the Virginia Civil Defense League and the NRA come armed with their guns to tell us that their rights should not be disenfranchised. And they come into our building with their big guns. Some of them bring the big giant AR-15s and other, they can bring whatever as long as it's open carry, that's fine.
It's not fun.
It's not fine. It's not. And we need to change the culture. We change the culture by continuing to have these conversations, by making sure that people know what's going on, by sharing the stories of the legislation that we tried to pass and were summarily rejected. So there are websites that you can go to where you can watch videos online of what happens in our subcommittees. I encourage you to share them. Do you know what the website is? I am blanking on it.
You just go to the General Assembly, there's links in there.
Yeah, but the more we talk about these issues, the better informed people are going to be. And that's one of the things that I think is what happens at the General Assembly often stays at the General Assembly, and then we come back and everybody just talks about, oh, it was great and so-and-so's bill died. Well, no, actually there's a lot of going on that is really frustrating and difficult, and an average Virginian would be disappointed to see the way some of our elected officials behave with legislation. And so you all using your voices in the public to get people's attention is just as important as speaking out to us to let us know what your opinions are. Yes?
I'm Jim Moran, Wexton, Virginia, and I want to bring a little bit of a twist or another way of thinking about this lady's question about when you organize and you protest. One thing is you're fighting big money, and what you need to do, what was my opinion, and I got kicked out of many years ago of the website, the blog that I think Joanne Simons started for the NRA protests that we've been having for many, many years that I don't think are really having a big enough effect. They're certainly, but you have to identify them and when I said that on the blog, everybody said, we're not fighting anybody, we're loving. Well, you ain't gonna, we're fighting, you can't love these people. They're beyond love. You gotta get rough with them. But when we went into Afghanistan, when Bush's or whoever took us over there, they didn't know, as I said, jack about what was going on over there. They didn't understand the culture, they didn't understand the vision, they didn't understand the complexity. If you don't identify the enemy, which at the NRA, we don't know who the enemy is there. Is it the Koch brothers putting money into it? I mean, who's putting the money in behind the NRA? And if we don't study that, and we studied Afghanistan how many years and we still don't get the complexity of their culture. Well, we don't even know our own culture. We don't even understand what the NRA is. And these big groups like GMOs, and they're screwing us over with our food. There's plenty. We have to understand what they're up to, and nobody really studies that. So that's my opinion. I just want to mention that. And
I would just add with the moms, I really appreciate you guys coming down, because now my first couple of years in General Assembly, we didn't have any counterpoint to the NRA and the CDL when they would come down on Martin Luther King Day, and now Moms Demand and other gun safety groups come down, and it's very encouraging to see you guys come down and provide that counterpoint on the same day. So that's very encouraging. Another thing I would add, just before we get to the next question, is that one other thing that's nice about this year is that for the first year, not all, but most of our committee meetings are live streamed, and the video is archived and saved. And it makes a huge difference because people are aware of what's going on. I mean, so much most of what we do happens in committee. I mean, you see the stuff on the floor and whatever, but by the time things get to the floor, you know, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't even make it to the floor because it gets killed quietly in committee, and it's a lot harder for them to do things quietly when people are there and people are watching. Another thing I would just add, because this reminds me with moms and everybody coming down, is that, you know, I have seen, and I'm sure Jennifer's noticed it too, just an increase in civic activism this session. With people coming down, to Richmond, and people speaking out, and people coming to packing committee rooms, like I really have not seen before. And I had a couple bills where that, and, you know, with the ERA, we had, and women came down from all over the Commonwealth and were very, very active and made their voices heard when the committee chair of rules, which by the way is a 12-3 Republican dominated committee, tried not to have a vote on the ERA. And you know, the women started singing "We Shall Overcome" and wouldn't stop, like stayed in their seats and sang "We Shall Overcome" until they finally relented and you know, did, rather than doing a recorded vote, they just did a show of hands. So now we have, you know, all of them, we know, you know, what their positions are on whether women should have equal rights in the United States Constitution. So, you know, I think that's really encouraging. I would encourage you guys to like watch some committees from time to time, because that's really where the action is, because that's where we vet bills and we have the debates and the interest, the stakeholders get up and testify, and victims testify, and you know, lobbyists testify, and you can really hear all the information that's going into that.
And we do that in the subcommittee level in the House, so it's a much smaller group. It could be as few as 5 people making those decisions, and we try to get those up on streaming. Progress VA does streaming in the subcommittee level, because at this point we're not officially Eyes on Richmond. That's it. eyesonrichmond.org. I think so. So Bob, you had your hand.
Well, I want to thank both Jennifer Squared for what you did down in Richmond, and so disappointed because I was at the General Law Subcommittee in the House where you, Senator Friedman, and Delegate Levine, and Delegate Simon, you know, finally, thinking maybe the 4th time would have been a charm just to add some anti-discrimination language, you know, struck down table until next year. And all the people who spoke were so incredibly eloquent. And there are far more people who spoke in support of that legislation than were the 3 who spoke out against it.
Stakeholders.
Yeah, supposed stakeholders. I just want to express just a little bit of frustration, even sometimes before with some legislation, even before it makes it to committee. And I guess I'm going to whine a little bit. It's about the influence that some of the paid lobbyists and the special interests have that could influence a patron of a bill that they'll file on their behalf. Historically, you know, we had one bill that can come file on our behalf. An innocuous bill, something we met with Jennifer a couple of years back. And after meeting with 2 lobbyists, after he met with 2 lobbyists, just struck the bill. Okay. Never given an opportunity to come down and advocate on that bill's behalf. It seems like the process is broken where so much, these lobbyists are paid. They're down there 24/7 throughout the session. You know, most citizens can't afford to be down in Richmond throughout the session like they are. And it seems like we don't have a fighting chance for bills or issues that are important to us when they're paid lobbyists for special interests, in our case, the CAI, the Virginia Legislation Action Committee, homeowner association, special interest, that whole industry. And we didn't stand a chance, and it was just frustrating, you know, on our behalf to see that happen. But you know, we'll keep fighting and hope that maybe we could wrest some of the control from these lobbyists back to the citizens where it belongs.
Well, thank you. So Bob was talking about, first he was happy that we actually heard legislation dealing with equality for LGBTQ members of our community, and was disappointed with the outcome of that because it was a very divisive and unpleasant hearing from what I heard. but also frustrated with the power difference between what he perceives as lobbyists versus grassroots folks. And I'll tell you, I had a bill that would have done equal pay for equal work. I had a number of people come and testify from a number of different places, and then the retailers came and they said, oh, it's going to be too difficult for us to manage this, we don't support it. And then the bill was dead. Now, you can't tell me that, you know, our businesses aren't able to turn on a dime and solve problems. Like, that was a cop-out, and they killed the bill. The only way we're going to change things is changing the people who are influenced by that. And I leave that with you. Yeah.
I do want to take a moment and just talk about the bill that Bob was referring to. That was my fair housing bill, which I have now brought 4 times in the General Assembly. So, and the history of that bill is something where, you know, it shows that I think you have to be